Okay, so today I'll be talking about this keyboard. It is I should say, old, second-hand Falbatech Ergodox. It comes with what I think are really cool keycaps. Don't mind the Scrabble style there. That's definitely kind of cool. But the reason I bought this is not necessarily because of the keycaps, but because I've always been eager to try out a Ergodox. In my mind, Ergodox does feel like one of the first sort of more open sourcey designs in ergonomic keyboard land, and you can actually still get suppliers for them. This one in particular is made by a company called Falbatech, and what I want to do in this video is talk a little bit about the design, pros and cons, but I also want to give a little bit of a cautionary tale when it comes to buying secondhand. But let's discuss the design first. Right off the bat, what you're going to notice is that this is a keyboard with a columnar layout. That means that your fingers can kind of move up and down, and you can also see that there's an ever so slight stagger here. Some of your fingers are longer, some of them are shorter, and that's kind of reflected in the layout over here. I do want to stress though that there are lots of other keyboards that have a more aggressive stagger, as you would maybe call it. So here you can see that the distance from the A to the S, oh, that's a whole different ballgame than what's happening here. So my hand can really just fit this one a little bit nicer, I could say. But the downside of having a keyboard like this is that this actually takes a longer time to get used to because the stagger is so aggressive. It does feel, though, that boards like this are becoming a little bit more popular in the ergonomic space, but it is cool to see that one of the earlier designs did keep in mind that some amount of stagger was needed, but the Ergodox itself has like very minimal stagger. The other thing that you're going to notice is that on what I would argue is a maybe more modern hobbyist board, is that it does come with a more circular layout for your thumb. And in my mind, that's just solid design. That's a great choice. But this keyboard doesn't necessarily do that. For sure, you've got thumb clusters, but you've got two big buttons that are easy to reach, and then there's a bunch of smaller buttons that are just kind of hard to reach. Now, what I think is the design here, and I could be wrong on this one, but it is my impression that this keyboard is a reflection of the Kinesis keyboards. These are keyboards that have a key well, and those were known to be quite ergonomic because of that key well. But the design of this board is basically exactly the same as that keyboard, it's just that this one is also flattened. So my impression is that maybe these buttons over here are easier to press in a situation where part of your hand is moving inward and then your thumb maybe has a little bit more wiggle room. But for sure, these two buttons over here, I don't know. Like, that really does feel like a stretch, even on a curved keyboard. So, in practice, I have found if you want to use this board comfortably, you've got two buttons per thumb, the innermost and the outermost. And also, if I'm honest, that's probably plenty. There are extra shortcuts that you might be able to associate here, but two per thumb I have found is like the base layout that works totally fine for me. You could add shortcuts here, it's just the stretch is a bit uncomfortable for your thumb. Like, you can really see that you gotta like move the rest of your hand either inward or really stretch your thumb. So, not the biggest fan of the thumb cluster, but at the same time, you can make it work. Another interesting design decision here is that all your extra pinky buttons over here, those are like your escape key usually and such, they are not normal small keys, they are big keys. I don't see a downside or an upside to that, honestly. The main thing that I can come up with is because it's wider, your keyboard is also bigger as a result. No harm, no foul in a way, but yeah, I thought that was still kind of curious. I wonder why they did that. There's also some extra buttons in the inside over here. You could theoretically reach them with your index finger. It's not the hardest stretch. I've not found a use for them at all, though, I should say. Like, I've no use for these extra buttons. But if you want to maybe, oh, I'm using Photoshop, different layout, if you want to do that, that's stuff you could totally do. So, extra buttons, that's still kind of cool. Now, the main thing that drew me to this particular Ergodox, I should say, is you can also find Ergodoxes out there that don't have this flat board attached. And they usually stop around here. What I was interested in is kind of figuring out, like, hey, would a board be more comfortable if my palm could just rest on it? Just to give an example, this is my Lily. I think it's a cute board, and it was pretty fun to type on. But one thing I've always noticed is when I put it down here, if my hand has to rest all the way from the bottom up until the top here, as you would normally, like your wrist really does this. And if I look at the thickness, it's a rough comparison, but it does seem like they're about the same width, really. Keycaps and all. So yeah, part of me was wondering, like, would it be more comfortable if I can actually rest my hands like a almost a bit shorter of an inch taller? And I think yeah, it's safe to say it's just more comfortable. It just plain is. What I don't know for sure yet, though, is if this is maybe the ideal height. From a different keyboard, I got these detachable palm pads, and I figured, hey, what would happen if I would just put the palm pad here and just sort of start typing on it? And although you do want the palm pad to fully be on the device, I found that if you just move it slightly down like so, that your thumb also has a little bit of extra place to move. But this is perhaps even more comfortable. Saying something definitive about comfort is a hard thing to do in a review. I've been trying this out for a few weeks, but really, if you want to find out if this is good long term, you're gonna have to use it for months. My impression is that that extra little bit of height does make it just slightly more comfortable. I don't know if I need like a slightly thinner or slightly thicker, if that will make it more or less comfortable, but either way, even without these extra palm pads, what I will say is just this, to me, as far as layout is concerned, is preferable to a board that doesn't have like something for the palm attached. What you can do with these boards, you can choose to maybe like float your hands. That way your wrist can still be straight. But I really prefer to rest my hand, and in that case, my hand would kind of have to do something like this. So preventing that and having a little bit more up there, good stuff. And I'm also happy to see that indeed the thought I had with this board originally, that also makes sense. So all that stuff is good. But, and this is the part where it becomes very clear this is a secondhand board. This board is also quite old. So if you have a look at the input there, you can see that the input is a micro USB. Nowadays, everything is USB-C, of course, but there you go, micro USB. What you're also going to notice is that there are switches in here, and when I bought this, I asked the seller, like, hey, what stuff is in here? And the seller said, well, they're blue switches. And you can hear it, they're very clicky. I thought, though, you know, no harm, no foul, I'll just replace them. And although in theory you can replace them, this keyboard is old enough that it comes from an era where hot swappable keyboards were not necessarily the norm. So these switches are totally soldered in. It is my impression that if you were to buy something from Falbatech nowadays, you can of course get them in the hot swap variant. They totally allow for that. And they even have a service that allows you to send this to them and they will sort of do the full upgrade. They can also change like the little controller hardware in this thing. So there's definitely like some options there. But realistically, you gotta imagine I share this room with someone else. Oh, I suddenly have a super loud keyboard and I cannot just go ahead and replace the switches. That is a thing you're gonna find when you're buying old keyboards, and this was one of those moments, unfortunately. But it wasn't the only awkward thing with this keyboard, though, that I also just want to pay a little bit of attention to, because there's also a thing with the software. Let me just plug everything in. So imagine I just get this keyboard and I start writing with it. I change some of the settings and then I start typing. This keyboard did not live up to my expectations. As you can see, something is up. As I'm typing along, I see characters that don't appear over here, and I was kind of wondering, like, what is up with that? For the longest time, I couldn't really find a good reason until I tried the mouse movement. Because here's the thing. When I bought this keyboard, the person that sold it to me said that he configured everything via Orex. Initially, that surprised me because in my mind, Orex is like the most amazing software ever for keyboard configuration, but it's proprietary and also only for boards produced by a company called ZSA. They make cool keyboards, but the main thing about their keyboards that I really like is this software. So you can imagine I was pleasantly surprised to learn that this board could actually be configured. Okay, so turns out that's kind of true in the sense that, yeah, I can configure it via the software. But it should be really stressed that ZSA, the maker of Orex, does not support this board. They only support their own, and that's totally fair. To sort of show you some of the weird things that I noticed here, let me activate the mouse layer and just have a look at the mouse cursor that's moving. I'm just going to move it left and right, but you can kind of just see the jitter. Like, it's really, really laggy. Imagine like trying out Homer modifications on a board like this, and everything is just super laggy. So that was really, really a bad experience. So I sent an email to Falbatech and I also sent an email to the ZSA people, and they both confirmed that this board is not supported by Orex. The confusion here, I think, is that initially the Ergodox was also an open source design. ZSA chose to produce a board using an open source design, but maybe that's how the person that I bought this from got the impression that you could configure with Orex, and it's kind of a small miracle that he was able to. The official way, at least the people from Falbatech were able to confirm that to me. Like, if you want to get this board new, you're going to get it with Vile. Vile is also pretty good software, no complaints in that department. But you can imagine that if someone is going to sell you this board and if they're going to tell you that Orex is supported, just take that with a grain of salt. I do want to mention that I did figure out what was actually wrong with the configuration, and that is that I configured this board with the glow setting, and apparently, depending on the controller, that is the thing that's actually causing the lag. When I went into Orex and when I set it to original, I get a little warning, but I can just set this device to function without any LEDs. There's also none in this thing, as far as I can tell. And then when I say, hey, go ahead and compile, I can save it to my keyboard. I need a little pointy thing to hit the reset button, but that should allow me to connect. It spots an unknown device. I can tell it to connect. And if I were now to go back to the layout here, and if I were to enter the mouse mode again, then you can see that the mouse movement now is actually like kind of what I would expect. This is definitely way more responsive and quick. So yeah, it does seem to work way better when I do this. I am fully aware, though, that technically everything that I'm doing here is not supported by Orex, so everything that I might be using could break any day, theoretically at least. I do want to stress the folks over at ZSA have been very helpful in emailing to me, but they also said very fairly this is just not a board that they support, so keep that in mind. Like, when you buy a secondhand board like this, don't assume that Orex software is going to go ahead and work. I also talked to the folks over at Falbatech, and they gave me some pointers on how to get Vile working on this thing, so I might explore that sometime later. But I figured maybe mentioning this explicitly, because it'd be a shame if you were to buy something like this secondhand with expectations that aren't met. So having said all of that, what do I think of this keyboard? Well, I think the keyboard is likable in the sense that you do have this flat board that you can rest your palm on. It is something I do miss with some of the other keyboards. One thing I should also maybe mention is there's no real tenting solution for this board. The backside of this board is just flat. I saw on the Falbatech website that you can buy these things on the side, kind of like side legs, if you will. I mean, I can also put like a little book under it. There's ways to sort of do MacGyver-style tenting. But I think, in summary, even though I do really appreciate the fact there's like a palm thing attached, part of me does miss like a better thumb cluster. If I were able to get this guy to just go into a wooden board like this, I would buy it in a heartbeat. But that's simply not the case. If I were to put the F of this keyboard right over here, and if I were to take this other board, this is the Voyager from ZSA. If I were to put the J over here as well, if I were to put my thumb on both hands on the most comfortable place, and if I then sort of look straight down, like where would that land? Then it would not land in the center of this button. It would actually land slightly more inward. What I think could have been better is if they made these two buttons just slightly smaller. They could have moved the button slightly more inward, and it would have also been a slightly better position for my thumb to be in. Better yet, they could have gone maybe for a non-straight design on this one, and you could kind of really move your fingers like so. In my mind, those would have all been like improvements. But I should also be reminded of the fact that this was maybe one of the earliest Ergo keyboard designs. I believe this was also like a community effort. I could be mistaken. It's also like an old design. And maybe one way of looking at it is also that this was maybe the parent of a lot of designs that followed. You can definitely sort of see from a distance how boards like the Moonlander might have been inspired by this. And in my mind, the Moonlander is a bit of an improvement over this, maybe. That said, there are plenty of people that also really dig this, and Falbatech is also still selling this board, and they wouldn't be doing that if people weren't buying them. So for me, this is definitely going to be a keyboard that I will sell. Maybe I will keep the keycaps. We'll see. But I have found this is just simply not going to be endgame for me. What I like about it is the fact that, the wood definitely gives it kind of a nice touch. Some of these keyboards, I mean, I can get maybe a 3D printed case for them, but having the wood definitely makes it more clean, so that's definitely, I would argue, a plus. But all in all, I think I've got other boards in my rotation that are just slightly more comfortable to use, so this will be a board that I will sell. And when I do, I'm going to make sure that this review video is up, so the new owner is just fully aware of the ups and downsides of this board. I guess one thing that I do want to maybe mention at the end that I do think is kind of nice, even though I have found that this board is not for me, I'm definitely like a keyboard hobbyist at this point. Like, I have so many things to pick from. The fact that this board isn't for me, but the fact that I can still resell it and make someone else happy, even though this board is 6 years old, is pretty darn cool. There's not a whole lot of electronics that can remain relevant for over 6 years. And the fact that we're at the spot where, there's open source software that makes it easy to configure boards like this, and that's not going to change. Suppliers like Falbatech will still answer emails. That's definitely kind of nice. So even though I will be selling this, I do think I can sell this without feeling too guilty. Because, if this is your intro to the hobby or to the world of ergo, it is a pretty good place to start. Or at least if you can stand the clicky switches.